Hi guys, welcome to the channel. My name's Chris Wright. I'm a landscape photographer working out of Granada, Spain. So this week I thought I'd do something different. I've been looking for an alternative to Adobe for quite a while now, and I use DxO PhotoLab a lot as a replacement for Lightroom. And one of the things that's sort of holding me back, I think, is the ability to do the layer-based processing in Photoshop, to do stitching, panoramas, to do layer-based, so focus stacking, exposure stacking, and so on. And so I keep going back to Photoshop to do these, and my workflow is somewhat complex now, in that I'll either use pure RAW and Lightroom and move on to Photoshop, or I'll use DxO PhotoLab and move on to Photoshop, or use Nik collection filters. So there's a little bit of dodging about. So I'm always interested in looking at other applications, and I've looked briefly at Affinity Photo in the past as a means of doing these stacking functions, so exposure blending and so on. I found it very good. So I thought I'd take a deeper dive into it over a series of videos. So what I'm going to do is, it's a very complicated application. There's a lot of functionality, and sort of numerically at least, there's probably at least as many controls as there are in Photoshop. So what I thought I'd do is break it down into its constituent parts and to have a much closer look at Affinity Photo and see if Affinity Photo is actually an adequate substitute for Lightroom and Photoshop. So let's get on with it. What I'm going to do is to have a look at the interface, have a look at what we call personas. Now in Affinity Photo, they use the idea of personas as a means of simplifying the application. So there are a different persona will give you a different set of tools, and this saves being baffled by an enormous array of tools. It gives you a subset. So the personas that we're interested in for this video are the develop persona, and this is the persona that allows us to import a raw file, do some basic amendments and alterations on the raw file, and then export it for use in social media. So we're going to go through that part of the workflow today. So this is roughly analogous to Adobe Camera Raw, although again the develop module on its own doesn't have as many features. But bear in mind that in Affinity, the intent is that we're going to move on with the processing into the photo persona, which is the much more fully featured, and this is the persona we'll be looking at in subsequent videos. Okay, let's get on with it. Okay, here we are in Affinity Photo 2, and what I want to do is do a quick tour of the interface. No photograph in here. If I pull down the File menu, what I'm seeing is File New, and anyone that has used Photoshop will be immediately familiar with this. This is how we start a completely blank file. But I'm not going to dwell on this. We'll come back to this later, because this is not strictly relevant to the business of processing raw images. What we do instead is we open File, and we go to Open, and we search for the image that we want to have a look at, and I'm going to use this one. A photograph I took roughly this time last year, and what we can see is, if we look up in this top left hand level here, we've got this list of personas, and the one that is lit up is called the develop persona, and it will do this automatically if you open a raw file. Now, the personas are Affinity's way of simplifying the interface. So there are 5 personas, and the interface will provide you tools for dealing with the tasks that are aligned to that persona. So in the develop persona, if we look at the right-hand side here, we've got histogram, we've got scope, which is something new to DxO users and indeed to Adobe Lightroom users. What scope is doing is something very similar to what the histogram is doing, and it's highlighting effectively the areas of luminance in the picture. So it moves left to right in the same order as the picture, but the amount of luminance is shown on the vertical scale. So if we look at this picture, generally we can see this reflected. This area here is much the brightest area in photograph, and that is reflected here. Slightly less bright as the church itself, that's reflected here, and so on and so forth. So it's interesting to work with scope because it does give you a slightly different view to the histogram, but for those of us, including me, who are much more well versed in how the histogram works, we're going to use the histogram. So in the histogram we've got an RGB view. We can isolate red channel, green channel or blue channel, but we're going to use all channels, and we can see the amount of blue, the amount of green and the amount of red in any given area of the photograph, if you like. So this runs from the darks over here to the lights over here. And what we can see immediately from the histogram is that this image is very slightly underexposed. It's bordering on the clipping here, and it's not clipping at all here. Now this triangle here, what it's telling us is that this is basically a coarse histogram. There is the possibility of having a fine histogram. So we click this. It doesn't make a massive amount of difference, but then there's not a massive amount of difference in this photograph. So my first instinct here would be to go for lens corrections. So in the lens corrections panel, we can see that Ricoh GR3X is ticked. If we take this off, we can see the corrections that have been applied by their absence. Turn it on again, and you can see that it's made a slight spatial adjustment. Now, we might look at this and think, well, there's converging verticals here. That's not a lens correction as such. That is because I was tilting the camera slightly upwards in order to get this area in. So what we might be tempted to do here is to have a look and see if we can correct this. And if we can, it would be in the vertical corrections and it would be there. But what we would then need to do is to crop the photograph to get rid of this incursion into the photo. So for the moment I'm going to put this back to what it was. So double click on the slider, double click on that one. We're just going to work with the raw photograph for the moment. So in the basic panel, the first thing I would do here is just adjust the exposure a little bit. Now, if I move it slightly to the right, we're brightening up the picture, and the intention here is to give me a balanced exposure that I can then go on to work with. So I'm not quite so concerned with the aesthetics of this as I am with the fact that I can get at the blacks and get at the whites. So I'm adding half a stop of exposure here. Now my black point, this is black point and white point, and this will knock on into the other controls. So I can set my black point, and the effect of this will be to modify, I think, the contrast control so that I can't overbake it. This is the black point setting. This is the white point setting, and this will be my first sort of modification. I would want to alter my white point a little bit, bring it up a little bit. We can see that these whites are not sort of showing true white, and I'd like to take my black point not too far down, but down far enough. Okay, so this is just a little tweak just to set up the picture. So nothing majorly different in the exposure settings, slightly different naming convention, but ultimately you can change the exposure of the entire photograph, you can set the white point, and you can set the black point. Let's have a look at contrast. With my enhance, I can alter the contrast if I want. Now, as we've seen in previous tutorials on other software processing, this is a global, and I'm not madly keen on global alterations. In this case, we've pushed our white points, we've pushed our black points. I'm not going to add any more contrast, because the only area that I would probably benefit from is enhancing the middle, and contrast is not going to do that. It's just going to push the black and white points out. Clarity, I feel, is completely inappropriate for this photograph. Now, the reason I feel that is because it was a very cloudy day and it was drizzling. So clarity was a quality that was entirely lacking in the real life. And what I might be tempted to do is even take some of the clarity off. So if I push it up to there, you can see that this is suddenly really bright and sharp, and it's not looking as it should do. Now, this is more of the sort of rainy day ambience that we had, and saturation I'm going to leave there because it's not, I can take that negative and really bleach all of the colour out of it, but I do want some of the colour in here. Vibrance, you can see the effect on the histogram here. It's not so much in evidence in the picture. So what vibrance does is effectively apply saturation to the colours that are not the main colours in the picture. I have an issue with clarity, with global clarity. What's going on, I think, is that camera manufacturers believe that a desirable picture is very bright, it's very colourful, and it's very sharp throughout. And I just don't think this matches up with reality. Okay, I'm a landscape photographer. This may not apply to all types of picture, but in landscapes, what tends to happen is you're very sharp at the front, and as you recede into the distance, the clarity diminishes and it actually becomes more hazy. So for me, a negative clarity would be something that I would be interested in looking at, and I'm much more likely to apply negative clarity throughout than I am to apply clarity throughout. White balance, we can adjust the white balance here, put that on. If anything, I don't want to introduce more blue much if I can help it, but and neither do I want to make it terribly warm, so I'll just take that back to as the camera chose it, because it's done a pretty good job. So white balance is something that I normally let my camera have control of, and this is partly because I'm primarily a landscape photographer. Cameras are very good at working out an overall white balance across a landscape. Global color temperature is something I very rarely work with. Now the tint is something that I do sometimes work with. Now, particularly in urban photography, you can get weird color casts caused by overhead lighting and so on and so forth. And the tint control is very useful in controlling those. Here, I'd be tempted to push my highlights up a little bit, but not massively, because we're already stretching this, and I'd take my shadows down a little bit. And the reason for this is to really push the emphasis in on the church. If I take my highlights down, you can see I'm actually affecting the church as well, and that's the reason that I'm not doing that. So now we can move on to the details. You've got noise reduction, luminance noise. This is luminance noise, and this is color noise. This is not a particularly noisy picture, so I'm going to leave that alone. And I'm going to go straight for tones. Now, if you've watched other videos that I've made, you'll know that I'm a big fan of the tone curve, much more so than I am of the sort of global contrast controls. It gives you a better thing. So I'm just going to bring this down a little bit more, and we'll push this up a little bit more. And we're now beginning to get the church to stand out more. Now here we've got something that will be familiar to PhotoLab users. This is these are effectively filters for use with black and white. We're going to leave that alone. Split toning. We can highlight hues within the pictures. I'm not going to look at the split toning panel in this video. The effect of this is to get to a point where we've got a photograph that I think can be readily applied or readily developed using more refined tools. So the way to get there is to go to develop, hit the develop button. This has put us into the photo persona, which is the top persona up here, and immediately we've got a completely different selection of tools. So the photo module is for another video, but we've looked at the develop module, and just to recap on that, the primary purpose, the way that I've approached it anyway, is to effectively prepare the photograph for further processing. So I'm going to be able to apply in layers using the photo module things like local contrast, masks, and so on and so forth. And this is very much the polishing and finishing off of the picture in my mind. Now, not all photographs need to be taken that far, and you know, many people will never get much beyond the develop module. But bear in mind that the develop module, these are all global alterations, global adjustments. And so there is a limited masking capability within the develop module, but that's for another day when we start talking about masks proper. Okay, so let's now talk about saving the photograph and exporting it in different dimensions for social media. The way you get a file out of Affinity Photo is kind of different. with Photoshop you can do a save, you can do an export. In Affinity Photo, what I can do is I can save. So I hit my save, and this will give me, and I'll show this to you. Let's go to the base of the thing so we can find it. We do a save there. Now let's just have a look and see what that looks like. So it's this file. So what we've got here is the file name with the extension AF Photo. Now this is no good for uploading to social media. What this is the state of the photograph with its alterations that we've applied so far. So when I go back to edit this photo some more, this is the file that I'm going to go back to. Okay, if I open the original raw file, that will come up with no alterations. So something to bear in mind there, that is something that's very different from Lightroom. Okay, so let's take that. Looking at the size of this is 6020 by 4024 pixels. This is way too big for a website. It's going to have to be resized. Now, the quickest way to do this is to choose File and choose Export. And what we can see here, we can choose JPEG, get best quality, and we can set the width here. So these are linked, so I can simply choose here, say 1920, and that immediately scales it. So it comes 1920 by 1283, which is much more appropriate for the web. It's still coming in at 1.89 megabytes, but normally I'll try to make them come in a little bit less than that, so I might be tempted to compromise a little on the quality. And simply hit export. And that will give you your file name. We're going to put it in the root as we did before. And here it is. So it's just over 2 megabytes. Now, interestingly, this is something that I've also noticed in virtually every other software, is when you resize the picture, it estimates the size, and the actual size is always a little bit more than that. So that can be frustrating when you're attempting to meet a size limit, say uploading to WordPress or whatever, but there you go. Okay guys, so we've looked at the develop module, and what we've seen is something that is roughly the equivalent of Adobe Camera Raw or Adobe Lightroom, DxO, PhotoLab, minus some of the bells and whistles that all of those applications have. However, the intent here is to move on to the next module, which is to move on to the photo persona in Affinity, and that's where we're going to see the real power of the application. So this is going to be a series of videos. I'm not too sure how many yet, but what I want to do is to cover the basic functionality and then to get down to specific use cases to create specific effects with certain photographs. So if there's anything that you would like to know or would like me to clarify, or any particular piece that you would like me to focus on, drop a note in the comments down below this video, and if you've got a moment to subscribe and like the video, that would be fantastic as well. We'll see you in a couple of weeks with another Affinity Photo video. Thank you very much. Bye.